The contract was still warm from the printer when they came for me. The sound of car doors slamming outside my apartment was a death knell. Heavy boots hit the pavement, too many too synchronized. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a bone cage. They're early. The thought was a sliver of ice in my veins. They weren't supposed to be here for another 3 hours. I had 3 hours to pack a life, to say goodbye to a self I would never be again. A fist pounded on the door, not a knock but a demand. The wood trembled. "Ariana Vales, open up!" The voice was flat, devoid of anything resembling patience. It was the voice of a man used to being obeyed. Little did I know, answering that door would be the first of 1,000 surrenders. My fingers, gone cold and clumsy, fumbled with the single sheet of paper on my kitchen table. The words blurred. Contractual lunar agreement. Party A, Sebastian Blackwood, Alpha of the Nightfall Pack. Party B, Ariana Vales, human female. Term, 5 years, renewable at Alpha's discretion. Primary condition, absolute obedience in all pack matters. I stopped reading. I'd already memorized the damning clauses. I'd signed it 12 hours ago, my signature a shaky, desperate scrawl. The ink had... Another thunderous blow shook the doorframe. Last chance to open it politely. I shoved the contract into my worn backpack, my hands trembling. This was it. The deal. My father's staggering debt to the Nightfall Pack, cleared with a single stroke of my pen. My freedom, my future, my body, traded for his life. A life he'd probably waste again on gambling and cheap whiskey. The bitterness was a familiar, acidic companion. I opened the door. 3 massive men filled the hallway, blocking the weak fluorescent light. They wore dark, tactical-style clothing, not uniforms, but something just as imposing. Their eyes, a unified, unsettling shade of amber, raked over me, assessing, dismissing. The one in front, with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, didn't speak. He simply jerked his chin toward the stairwell. "My bag," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "Is being taken care of," Scar said. His tone left no room for discussion. "You come with us, now." The drive was silent, oppressive. The black SUV smelled of leather, pine, and a faint, wild musk that prickled the hairs on my arms. I stared out the tinted window as the city bled away into dense, ancient forest. The trees were a dark, swallowing green. The road narrowed, winding deeper into territory that felt watched. What happened next changed everything. We passed a wrought iron archway, the words Nightfall Territory forged into the metal. The air itself seemed to thicken, to hum with a low, subaudible frequency that vibrated in my molars. The pack lands, my prison for the next 5 years. My stomach coiled into a hard knot. The compound wasn't what I expected. No crude log cabins or barbed wire. Instead, a collection of elegant, rustic lodges and stone buildings sprawled around a central courtyard. It was powerful, wealthy, and utterly remote. People, werewolves, stopped what they were doing to stare as the SUV rolled to a halt in front of the largest structure, a 2-story building of dark wood and glass that commanded the space. The Alpha's house. Scar opened my door. Out. My legs were jelly, but I forced them to move. The air here was colder, sharper, laden with the scent of wet earth, pine, and that pervasive animal musk. Dozens of eyes pinned me from porches, pathways, and windows. Their gazes were not friendly. They were curious, hostile, calculating. A human, a contracted Luna, an insult. The heavy oak door of the Alpha's house swung open before we reached it. A woman stepped out. She was stunning, with waves of chestnut hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. She wore an expensive-looking sweater and jeans, but she moved with a predator's grace. Her smile was bright, practiced, and didn't reach her eyes. "You must be Ariana. I'm Elizabeth, the pack beta." Her voice was melodic, welcoming, and utterly false. "We've been so eager to meet you. Sebastian is waiting in his study, this way." She looped her arm through mine as if we were old friends. Her touch was cool, her grip deceptively strong. She led me inside, Scar and the others melting away. The interior was all exposed beams, stone fireplaces, and expensive minimalism. It smelled of cedar smoke and alpha dominance, a spicy, oppressive scent that made my head feel light. "He's been on edge," Elizabeth confided in a theatrical whisper as we walked down a hall lined with framed maps of territory lines. "The pack is uneasy with a human Luna, even a contractual one. And then there's the whole issue with the Ridgecrest pack sniffing around our borders. But you'll soothe him, I'm sure. That's what you're here for, isn't it?" Her words were darts expertly thrown. Uneasy pack, border threats, soothe him. I was a political tool and a bed warmer, nothing more. She stopped before a double door of dark wood. "In you go. Best not to keep him waiting." She gave me a little push, her smile sharpening. "Good luck." The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me in. The study was a library, an office, and a throne room all in one. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk of polished obsidian wood, and in front of a wall of windows overlooking the darkening forest stood him. Sebastian Blackwood. He had his back to me, a silhouette of formidable breadth against the twilight. He was taller, broader than any man I'd ever seen, his presence filling the vast room, pressing against the walls. He wore a simple black shirt and dark trousers, but they did nothing to soften the raw power he exuded. I could feel it, a physical pressure in the air, a silent, rolling thunder that made my breath catch. "Ariana Vales." He didn't turn. His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and up into the soles of my feet. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of possession. "Yes," I managed, the word a dry leaf in my throat. He turned slowly. The air left my lungs in a rush. He was brutal beauty. Sharp, aristocratic features, a jawline that could cut glass, and hair the color of raven wings. But his eyes. Oh, his eyes. They were the pale, crystalline blue of a glacial lake, and they held a ferocity, an ancient intelligence that was utterly inhuman. They scanned me from head to toe, a look so penetrating I felt physically stripped. There was no warmth in that gaze, only assessment and a simmering, tightly leashed intensity that felt dangerously close to anger. "You signed my contract." He took a single step toward me. The space between us crackled. It wasn't chemistry, it was a live wire, a warning siren. A primal part of my brain, the part that knew about wolves and lambs, screamed at me to run. My feet were rooted to the spot. "I did," I said, forcing my chin up. "My father's debt is irrelevant now." He cut me off, his voice a whip crack. "The only thing that matters is the agreement. You are here as my Luna, in name, in function. You will attend ceremonies. You will sit by my side. You will present a united front to the pack and to our rivals. You will, when required, share my bed." Each statement was a hammer blow. My face flamed, but I held his gaze. "I understand the terms." "Do you?" He was suddenly closer, having crossed the room with that preternatural, silent speed. The musk of him, wilderness, spice, and sheer dominance, enveloped me, dizzying. "You understand that your human fragility is a liability, that every enemy I have will now see you as the easiest point to strike, that the pack you are meant to lead sees you as a weakness I was forced to acquire." His words were meant to wound, to put me in my place. They succeeded, but they also sparked a defiant ember in my chest. "Then why acquire me at all?" I shot back, surprising myself. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe annoyance, crossed his face. His eyes narrowed. "Politics, a show of stability. And because your father's gambling brought him into my territory and Pack law demands either his life or a blood price. He offered you, I accepted. Cold, so cold. I was a transaction, a blood price. For 5 years, I whispered. For as long as I find you useful, he corrected, his glacial eyes trapping mine. The contract is renewable at my discretion, not yours. That was my first mistake, believing I had any power here. Before I could form a response, the study door burst open. A man strode in without knocking. He was handsome in a sharp, cruel way, with slicked-back blonde hair and eyes of a muddy, hostile brown. He wore a smirk like a weapon. His gaze swept over me with open contempt before landing on Sebastian. Sebastian! I heard the little human had arrived. Couldn't wait to see the new accessory. Sebastian's posture didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Stephen, you weren't summoned. Stephen, the name from the contract. Beta, second in command, and clearly, a Pack matter is my matter, Stephen said, his voice a lazy drawl. He circled me slowly, a shark scenting blood. So this is her. She's even weaker than she smells. No spirit, no strength. The Pack will eat her alive, Sebastian. This farce will undermine your authority. My authority is not your concern, Sebastian said, the words lethally quiet. Everything about this Pack is my concern. Stephen snapped, the smirk vanishing. Or have you forgotten our father's will? The Pack's strength is everything. And you bring in this breakable thing as our Luna. It's an insult. A joke. The hatred in his voice was palpable. I stood perfectly still, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was the focal point of a silent, vicious power struggle I barely understood. Sebastian moved. One moment he was across from me, the next he was between Stephen and me, his back to me, shielding me. The gesture was possessive, protective, but it felt less about me and more about asserting dominance. You question my judgment. Sebastian's voice was now a pure, animal growl. The sound raised every hair on my body. I saw the muscles in his back tense beneath the fabric of his shirt. Stephen held his ground, but a flicker of fear showed in his muddy eyes. I question this particular decision, Alpha. He spat the title. The Ridgecrest wolves are already laughing. They say you've taken a pet. Get out, Sebastian said, the command final and absolute. Before I reconsider your position as Beta. The threat hung in the air, thick and dangerous. Stephen's face contorted with rage. His eyes shot to me over Sebastian's shoulder, promising pure, undiluted malice. This isn't over, he hissed. To me or to Sebastian, I wasn't sure. He turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shuddered. The silence he left behind was ringing, charged with violent energy. Sebastian didn't turn around for a long moment. When he did, his expression was carved from stone. You see, your presence is a weapon. Stephen will use you to challenge me. Others will follow. Then let me go, I breathed, the words escaping before I could cage them. His hand shot out not to strike, but to cup my chin, forcing my head up. His touch was searing, electric. A jolt, like a static shock but deeper, hotter, shot through my entire nervous system. My breath hitched. His eyes widened a fraction, the glacial blue darkening with a sudden, profound confusion that mirrored my own. What was that? He dropped his hand as if burned, taking a half-step back. He stared at his fingers, then at me, a storm brewing in his gaze. The undeniable gravitational pull I felt toward him, the one I'd been desperately ignoring, seemed to echo in the sudden tension of his jaw, the rapid pulse I could now see at his throat. No, he said, his voice rough, uneven. You are mine now, by contract. You belong to Nightfall. He said it like a curse, like a sentence. A young man appeared at the study door, this time knocking gently. He had kind, anxious green eyes and tousled brown hair. He looked barely out of his teens. Alpha. The guest suite is ready for Miss Vales. His voice was soft, apologetic. Sebastian broke our locked gaze, turning toward the window, his back once more a rigid wall. Micah will show you to your rooms. You will dine with the pack tonight in the Great Hall. Be ready at 7. Wear this. He gestured to a simple, elegant black dress laid over a chair. It was my size. Micah gave me a sympathetic, nervous smile and gestured for me to follow him. I moved on numb legs, the ghost of Sebastian's touch still burning on my skin, the shock of that connection echoing in my bones. As I reached the door, Sebastian spoke again, his voice low, meant only for me. A word of advice, Ariana. The full moon is in 3 nights. The pack will run. You will be locked in your rooms. Whatever you hear, do not come out. The beast is not discerning. The warning was ice in my veins. I glanced back. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes I saw the flicker of the wolf. Wild, untamed, and hungry. Micah led me through a maze of corridors to a spacious, beautifully appointed suite. It had a sitting area, a bedroom, and a large bathroom. A gilded cage. My backpack sat on the bed, looking small and pathetic. I'm Micah, the young man said, wringing his hands. I'm sort of the Omega. I run errands, help out. If you need anything, I'm usually around the kitchen or the gardens. He offered another timid smile. I'm sorry about all of this. It's not really fair to you. His kindness was a balm and a tragedy. Thank you, Micah. He nodded and scurried away, leaving me alone in the silent suite. The cliffside view was breathtaking, the forest a sea of shadows under the rising moon. I walked to the window, my reflection a pale ghost in the glass. I touched my chin where Sebastian's fingers had been. The skin still tingled. What was that connection? Why did it feel like a key turning in a lock deep inside me? A low, mournful howl echoed from the depths of the woods, far away yet chillingly clear. It was answered by another, closer this time. A chorus began, a song of wildness and pack and ancient power. The nightfall wolves were singing to the moon. As I stood there, a different sound reached me. Not a howl, but voices, raised in argument, filtering up from an open window below mine. Stephen's voice, sharp with fury. Not just weak, she's a trigger. Did you see his face when he touched her? He felt it too. If the bond snaps into place before we can stop it, everything we've planned is ruined. She has to be gone before the full moon. One way or another. A calmer, female voice answered. Elizabeth. Patience, Stephen. A direct move now would make you the obvious suspect. But an accident during the chaos of the moon run, who could blame a young, frightened human for wandering into the wrong part of the woods? The beasts are so unpredictable. My blood turned to ice. Their words weren't just malice. They were a plot, a death sentence. The howling swelled, drowning out their treacherous whispers. I backed away from the window, my legs giving way as I sank onto the bed. I had come here as a sacrifice to save a man who didn't deserve it. I had walked into a gilded cage in a den of wolves, but I had just discovered something far worse. I wasn't just a prisoner or a pawn. I was prey. The words, "Make it look like an accident," echoed in the silence of the grand, empty hall, chilling me more thoroughly than the mountain air ever could. My back pressed against the cold stone wall. I held my breath, the taste of my own fear metallic on my tongue. Stephen and Elizabeth were planning to kill me, before the full moon. The soft scuff of their retreating footsteps faded. I waited, counting the frantic beats of my heart until I was sure they were gone. My legs, trembling, finally gave out, and I slid down the wall into a crouch, the rough-hewn stones scraping through my thin sweater. An accident. During the run. The full moon was in 3 days. I had 3 days to figure out how to survive a pack of werewolves who saw me as a disposable stain on their alpha's reputation. The sound of a distant door closing, heavy and final, spurred me into motion. I couldn't stay here. Pushing myself up, I crept back the way I'd come, my senses hyperalert to every creak of the old building, every whisper of wind outside. My room. I needed to get to my room and think. It was the only place that had been assigned to me, a gilded cage, but at least it had a lock. I made it back without seeing another soul, the compound feeling eerily deserted. Slipping inside, I turned the old-fashioned key in the lock with a soft, satisfying click. The sound did little to calm my nerves. A locked door wouldn't stop a werewolf. Think, Ariana, think. My father's face, hazy with drink and desperation, flashed in my mind. Just sign it, Ari. It's just a formality, a business arrangement. It clears the debt. He'd sold me to save his own skin, and now that transaction was going to get me killed. The anger that rose was hot and sharp, cutting through some of the fear. I wasn't going to die for his mistakes. I refused. But what could I do? Run? Into a forest I didn't know, teeming with supernatural creatures who could track my scent from miles away. My only potential ally was Micah, the Omega, and he seemed too terrified of his own shadow to be of much help. And then there was Sebastian. Sebastian Blackwood, the man who owned my contract, the man whose touch had sent a current through me that felt like a live wire shoved into my soul. He was cold, arrogant, and saw me as a political tool. But he was also the Alpha. If his betas were conspiring to kill his contracted Luna, that was a direct challenge to his authority, wasn't it? Telling him might be my only play. It was a dangerous one. He might not care. He might even approve. A sharp rap at the door made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. Ariana, it's Micah. His voice was muffled, timid. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. He stood there, holding a tray with a bowl of stew, bread, and a glass of water. His eyes were wide, darting down the hallway. I brought you dinner. You missed it in the hall. Thank you, I said, my voice hoarse. I took the tray. His kindness in this den of wolves felt like a lifeline. Micah! He flinched slightly at the direct address. Yes, Luna. Don't call me that, I whispered harshly. What happens on a full moon run? His face paled. The pack runs, in wolf form. It's a celebration of the moon, a time to strengthen bonds, to feel the territory. The Alpha leads. And a human who is supposed to be Luna. He swallowed hard, unable to meet my eyes. It's not done. Humans don't run, they stay in the compound. It's not safe. The energy is too wild, and not all wolves have perfect control, especially the younger ones. He finally looked at me, and the pity in his gaze was worse than Stephen's contempt. It would be very dangerous. An accident waiting to happen. I see, I said flatly. Is there anything else? He asked, already edging away. No, thank you, Micah. He nodded and scurried away like a startled rabbit. I closed the door, locking it again. The stew smelled rich and gamey, but my stomach churned. I set the tray on the dresser. So I would be expected to go on this run. And there, amidst the chaos of powerful beasts, something would happen to me. A stray, uncontrolled wolf. A tragic misstep over a cliff. The possibilities were endless. The next day passed in a blur of tense monotony. I was largely ignored. I explored the parts of the main lodge I could access, feeling the weight of hostile stares from pack members I didn't know. Their whispers followed me like ghosts. Human, weak, mistake. Elizabeth found me in a small library in the afternoon, her smile as polished and fake as before. Ariana, dear, there you are. We're all so looking forward to the full moon run tomorrow night. It's a sacred tradition for us. Sebastian insists you participate, to bond with the pack, you understand. Her eyes glittered with malicious delight. "Don't worry, we'll all keep an eye on you." The threat was velvet-wrapped. "How kind," I managed to say, my voice barely steady. "It's what a beta does," she said, tilting her head. "Support the Luna in all things." She glided away, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and deceit in her wake. I needed to see Sebastian. The decision crystallized with a cold certainty. It was a risk, but waiting to be slaughtered was not an option. I asked a stern-faced enforcer where the Alpha might be, and after a long, scrutinizing look, he grunted, "Training grounds." West of the courtyard. The training grounds were a wide, hard-packed dirt field flanked by dense forest. The sounds reached me first. The grunts of impact, sharp commands, the thud of bodies hitting the earth. As I approached, hidden in the tree line, I saw him. Sebastian was shirtless, grappling with two enormous enforcers at once. His body was a landscape of powerful muscle and old, silvery scars that gleamed in the dappled afternoon light. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace, a whirlwind of controlled violence. He wasn't just fighting. He was teaching, correcting, dominating. With a swift, brutal motion, he disarmed one enforcer and used his own momentum to throw him into the other, sending them both sprawling in the dust. "Your coordination is sloppy," Sebastian's voice cut through the air, not even winded. "The Ridgecrest scouts won't give you a second chance to find it. Again." This was the wolf. This was the power I was contractually bound to. The memory of our touch, that shocking jolt of connection, felt like a hallucination here, watching this. What happened next changed everything. As the enforcers regrouped, Sebastian's head snapped up. He turned, not towards his men, but directly towards my hiding place in the trees. His gaze, gold-flecked and intense, locked onto mine as if he'd known I was there all along. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The enforcers bowed their heads and jogged off, casting curious glances my way. Sebastian grabbed a towel from a post, wiping the sweat from his chest as he walked toward me. I forced myself to step out of the shadows, my heart hammering against my ribs. The raw, animal power of him up close was overwhelming, mixed with the scent of pine, earth, and exertion. "You seek me out," he stated, stopping a few feet away. "Why?" I clenched my hands to stop them from shaking. "We need to talk about the full moon run." One dark eyebrow arched. "Elizabeth informed you, good, you will run with the pack. It is non-negotiable." "I heard what Stephen and Elizabeth are planning," I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "Last night in the hall, they said they'd make my death look like an accident during the run." There was a beat of silence. The only sound was the wind in the tall pines, a low, whispering sigh. Sebastian's expression didn't change. No shock, no anger. His eyes just bored into me, assessing, weighing. "And you expect me to believe you," he finally said, his tone dangerously soft. "Why would I lie? To drive a wedge between me and my betas, to gain sympathy, to avoid a tradition that frightens you." He listed the reasons coolly, taking a step closer. The air between us seemed to crackle. "You are an outsider, Ariana Vales, a human who bought her way into this pack with a signature. Your word holds no weight against theirs." The dismissal was a physical blow. "So you're just going to let them kill me?" My voice rose, fear morphing into fury. "I'm your Luna under contract. Doesn't that mean anything? Or is my death just another clause to be voided?" He closed the final distance with a speed that made me gasp. He loomed over me, his presence swallowing the light. "You are a means to an end," he growled, his voice low and visceral. "A solution to a political problem. The contract specifies your role, not your longevity. If you cannot survive the politics of this pack, then you are of no use to me." Tears of rage and helplessness stung my eyes. I refused to let them fall. My father's debt is cleared. My life is my own. Is it? He reached out and I flinched, expecting to be grabbed. But his fingers only brushed a strand of hair that had escaped my braid, tucking it roughly behind my ear. The moment his skin made contact with mine, it happened again. The world dropped away. The training ground, the forest, the sounds, all muffled into a dull roar. That same electric current, 1,000 times stronger than before, exploded from the point of contact, racing through every nerve ending. My breath hitched. I saw his pupils dilate, the gold in his eyes flaring like molten suns. A low, almost inaudible rumble vibrated in his chest, a sound that wasn't entirely human. It was a pull, a deep, resonant knowing that screamed mine into the very core of my being. He jerked his hand back as if burned, staring at his fingers with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. The cold alpha mask was utterly shattered. For a second, he looked as lost as I felt. "What was that?" I whispered, the confrontation forgotten, consumed by the terrifying mystery of that connection. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The air was thick with unsaid things, with a primal recognition that defied his cold logic and my human fear. "Leave," he commanded, but his voice was strained, lacking its usual absolute authority. "Sebastian, get out!" The roar was pure alpha power, laced with something else, panic. It slammed into me, not a physical force, but a wave of commanding energy that made my knees buckle. I stumbled back, turned, and fled, the sound of his ragged breath echoing in my ears. I ran back to the compound, his reactions cycling in my mind. He felt it too. He was terrified of it. What did that mean? If only I had known the truth, that this connection was the one thing in the world that could upend all his plans and threaten his control. I spent the evening in a state of nervous exhaustion, picking at the food Micah brought. The confrontation had solved nothing. Sebastian wouldn't protect me. The connection between us only seemed to make him more hostile. I was on my own. As dusk deepened into night, a new sound filtered into my room, the gentle, persistent patter of rain against the window. It grew heavier, becoming a steady downpour. A storm, the perfect cover for nervous footsteps in the hallway. I was lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling when I heard them. Not outside, inside the lodge, muffled voices arguing right outside my door. "Not the time, Stephen." Elizabeth's whisper was sharp, urgent. "The run is tomorrow. This is our last chance to change his mind. If we present a united front now, he'll see reason. He'll renounce the contract before the moon rises." Stephen's voice was a low, angry thrum. "You think talking will work? After what we felt today, he's unsettled. That human is getting under his skin in ways we didn't predict." A chill that had nothing to do with the rain swept through me. What we felt today, could they feel that connection between Sebastian and me? "All the more reason to act," Stephen insisted. "We go to him, together, in his study. Now, we force the issue. The Ridgecrest mockery, the pack's discontent, the weakness she represents. We make him choose, his pack's strength or his human pet." Their footsteps moved away, heading down the hall toward what I assumed was Sebastian's private study. My mind raced. They were going to confront him, to force him to break the contract. If he agreed, what happened to me? Would I be cast out, or killed anyway without the need for an accident? A reckless, desperate idea took root. I had to hear. I had to know what he would decide. Silent as a ghost, I unlocked my door and slipped into the dim hallway. The stone floor was cold under my bare feet. The only light came from the occasional wall sconce, casting long, dancing shadows. I followed the path I thought they'd taken. The roar of the storm outside, masking any small sounds I made. I found a heavy oak door, slightly ajar, at the end of a secluded corridor. A sliver of warm firelight spilled out. Inside, I could hear the crackle of a hearth and the tense silence before a storm of a different kind. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, my ear angled toward the gap. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I cannot stand by this farce any longer, Sebastian. It was Stephen, his tone formal, dripping with false respect. The pack is restless. The Ridgecrest wolves are howling at our borders, scenting weakness. Fathers will entrusted this pack to you, but it also entrusted us to guide you. This human Luna is a fatal error. My decisions are not subject to your approval, Beta, Sebastian's voice replied. It was the cold, controlled Alpha voice, but I heard the underlying tension, a wire pulled taut. This one should be, Elizabeth chimed in, her voice sweetly reasonable. Sebastian, we felt the disturbance today, on the training grounds. That energy between you and the girl, it's unnatural. It's clouding your judgment. The pack can feel your discord. It weakens us all. What you felt is none of your concern, Sebastian growled, a hint of that earlier panic edging his words. It is every pack member's concern, Stephen shot back. Our Alpha's stability is paramount. This contract was a business arrangement. But now something is happening, something that ties you to her. You must sever it. Renounce the contract before the full moon. Send her away. Let the Ridgecrest see our strength is unwavering. The pause that followed was agony. The fire popped. The rain lashed the windows. And if I refuse? Sebastian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Then you leave us no choice, Stephen said, and the threat in the room became a living, breathing thing. We will challenge your fitness to lead. A divided pack cannot stand. The full moon run will reveal the truth. If the Luna does not survive, the problem resolves itself, and the pack's faith in your leadership will be reassessed. My blood ran cold. It was an ultimatum, a coup in the making. Sebastian's laugh was a short, harsh bark. You would challenge me, you, Stephen. Not just me, Stephen said, and I could hear the smug smile in his voice. The senior warriors, the elders, they agree. The human is a crack in our foundation. Remove her, or we will remove you. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could almost feel Sebastian's rage, a building pressure in the room. This was it. He would choose his pack. He would choose his power. He would let them have me. When he spoke, his words were slow, deliberate, and carved from ice. Get out! Sebastian. Get out of MY sight! The roar shook the door in its frame. I heard the swift movement of feet, the door swinging wider. I shrank back into the shadows, but not before I saw a glimpse inside. Sebastian stood before the fire, his back to the door, his shoulders rigid with fury. Stephen and Elizabeth were retreating, their faces masks of thwarted anger. He hadn't agreed. He hadn't yielded. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed down the hall. I stood frozen in the dark, the rain drumming its frantic rhythm. He'd protected his position, but he hadn't protected me. The threat still stood. Tomorrow night, on the run, I would be a target. As I turned to creep back to my room, a large, warm hand clamped over my mouth from behind, and a powerful arm locked around my waist, lifting me clean off my feet. I struggled, a muffled scream trapped in my throat, as I was dragged swiftly and silently away from the Alpha's study, away from the light, and into the deeper, swallowing darkness of the lodge. A hand, large and crushing, clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream. The scent of pine and damp earth filled my nostrils as I was yanked backward into the deep shadows between two lodges. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This is it. Stephen and Elizabeth didn't wait for the full moon. Quiet, a voice growled in my ear, low and strained. It wasn't Stephen's arrogant tone. It was a voice I knew, one that had recently been filled with panic. Sebastian. The shock of recognition made me go limp. He didn't release me, but his grip shifted from brutal to merely unyielding, his body a solid wall of heat at my back. I could feel the rapid, heavy thud of his heart against my shoulder blade, a wild drumbeat matching my own. "If you scream, they will come," he whispered, his lips almost touching my ear. The sound was a vibration that went straight through me. "And they will kill you for eavesdropping on your Alpha. Do you understand?" I managed a stiff nod against his palm. The rough calluses of his hand scraped my cheek. He slowly, carefully, removed his hand from my mouth but kept one arm locked around my torso, pinning my arms to my sides. We stood frozen in the ink-black alley, listening. From the direction of his study, I could hear the muffled, angry rise of Stephen's voice, then the slam of a door. They had left. Sebastian didn't move. His breath was warm on my neck, coming in short, controlled bursts. The energy that had exploded between us on the training ground was a silent, humming presence now, a live wire stretched taut in the narrow space. He was fighting it. I could feel the tension coiling in every muscle of the body that held me. "You," he said, the word gritted out, "are a catastrophic complication." I found my voice, a thin thread of sound. "You heard them. They're going to challenge you because of me." "I am aware of my pack's politics," he snapped, but the heat was gone, replaced by a weary, icy frustration. "Your eavesdropping merely confirmed the timeline. The full moon run." He finally released me, stepping back as if I were electrified. I stumbled forward, turning to face him. In the gloom, his eyes glowed with a faint, lupin light. He looked ravaged. The impeccable control was fractured, hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it, his shirt untucked. "Why did you grab me?" I asked, rubbing my arms where he'd held them. "To prevent you from doing something even more stupid than listening at my door," he said, turning his head away, refusing to look directly at me. "If you had run, your fierce scent would have painted a trail straight to you. Stephen's allies are everywhere tonight. They are watching, waiting for a misstep." The reality of my situation, the sheer scale of the trap I was in, closed around me like a vice. The compound was no longer just a gilded cage. It was a hunting ground, and I was the prey. The cold night air seeped through my thin sweater, but the chill came from within. "What happens now?" The question was barely a whisper. Sebastian finally looked at me, the glow in his eyes intensifying. "Now," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in the very ground beneath our feet, "you come with me, and you do exactly as I say. Your survival until the full moon, and mine, depends on it." He didn't wait for agreement. He simply turned and moved silently down the shadowed path, a darker shape in the darkness. My choice was an illusion. Stay here and be found, or follow the volatile Alpha who was both my jailer and, inexplicably, my only protector. I followed. The sounds of the compound faded. The distant clatter from the kitchens, the murmur of voices from the great hall. He led me away from the central lodges, toward the very edge of the territory where the forest pressed in like a living wall. The air grew colder, sharper. The only sounds were the crunch of our footsteps on the frost-tinged grass and the distant, mournful cry of an owl. If only I had known that following him would lead me not to safety, but to the heart of the very mystery that was tearing his pack, and him, apart. We stopped before a small, solitary structure built into the base of a massive granite outcrop. It looked ancient, older than any other building in the compound, made of fitted stone with a heavy wooden door. Sebastian produced an old iron key and unlocked it. The door swung inward with a groan of protest. "Inside," he commanded. I hesitated on the threshold. The interior was pitch black, smelling of cold stone, old books, and something else. A sharp, metallic tang like ozone after a lightning strike. What is this place? A sanctuary, he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. Or a prison. The interpretation depends on the occupant. Get in. I stepped inside. He followed, shutting the door and plunging us into absolute darkness. A moment later, the strike of a match and the warm, dancing light of a lantern bloomed, pushing the shadows into the corners of a small, circular room. It was sparsely furnished. A narrow cot, a simple wooden table and chair, shelves carved into the stone walls holding scrolls and leather-bound volumes. A hearth stood cold and empty. "You will stay here until the full moon," Sebastian stated, placing the lantern on the table. The light carved harsh planes into his face. "You're locking me up," dread twisted in my gut. "I am removing you from the board," he corrected, pacing a short, restless path. "Stephen and Elizabeth believe they can manipulate the chaos of the run to eliminate you. By hiding you, I remove their opportunity. It forces their hand. They will have to challenge me directly, without the pretext of an accident." I stared at him, understanding dawning. "You're using me as bait to force the confrontation." He stopped pacing and pinned me with that luminous gaze. "You were always the catalyst, Ariana. The contract was the spark. Your presence is the flame. I am merely controlling where the fire burns." The clinical, political calculation in his words should have made me hate him. But I saw the pulse jumping in his throat, the way his fists clenched and unclenched. He was not in control. Not of his pack, and certainly not of whatever was happening between us. "And what about this?" I asked, gesturing weakly between us. "The shock, the thing that happens." A violent flinch went through him. He turned his back to me, shoulders rigid. "It is irrelevant, a malfunction, a weakness." "It didn't feel weak," I whispered, remembering the terrifying, exhilarating surge of power, the sense of something slotting into place. It felt huge. He whirled around, his composure cracking. "It is a problem," he roared, the sound echoing off the stone. In the confined space, his anger was a physical force. "My father warned me of bonds that could unmake an alpha. Bonds that cloud judgment, that prioritize one life over the whole pack. He called them a curse." He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "And now, with a human on the eve of a challenge, it is not a gift, Ariana. It is a weapon my enemies can use against me." They felt the disturbance. They smell it on us. The confession hung in the cold air. His vulnerability was more frightening than his anger. This powerful, terrifying man was afraid of a connection of me. "What is it?" I pressed, taking a small step toward him. "Tell me." He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time since he dragged me into the shadows. The struggle within him was naked on his face. "My kind, we have legends, of fated bonds, mates." He spat the word like a poison. "A pull that defies reason, politics, even will. It forges a link that can make an alpha invincible or destroy him utterly. It is said to feel like a completion, a recognition." My breath caught. A recognition. That's exactly what it had felt like in that first moment in my apartment and again on the training ground. A terrifying, profound sense of knowing. You think we're that. The concept was too vast, too alien to grasp. "I think it is an impossibility that is currently happening," he said, his voice dropping to a ragged whisper. "And if my pack suspects a true mate bond with a human, they will not just challenge me. They will tear me apart to sever it. They will see it as the ultimate corruption of our bloodline." The lantern flame guttered, casting frantic shadows. The consequence of his words settled over me. I wasn't just a political liability. I was an existential threat to his very being, and he had just hidden me away alone with him. A new, more immediate tension replaced the political one. The air in the small room became charged, thick. We stood 3 feet apart, and the space between us felt like a vacuum, pulling us together. His scent, snow, cedar, and wild, dark earth, filled my senses. I saw his nostrils flare, catching my own human scent. The silent, humming wire between us vibrated with a new intensity. He took a step back, hitting the edge of the table. "This changes nothing," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "The contract stands. You are my lunar in name only, a symbol. This phenomenon must be suppressed." "How do you suppress a legend?" I asked, my own voice unsteady. Before he could answer, a sound pierced the night. A long, rising howl from the direction of the compound. It was not a mournful cry, but a sharp, declarative signal. It was answered by another and another from different points around the territory. Sebastian's head snapped up, all vulnerability vanishing, replaced by the lethal focus of a predator. "The watch rotation," he muttered, but his eyes narrowed. The howls were too close, too coordinated. Another sound followed. The soft, unmistakable snick of the lock on the heavy wooden door turning from the outside. We weren't alone. Sebastian moved with blinding speed. In one fluid motion, he blew out the lantern, plunging us into utter blackness, and shoved me behind him, his body a shield between me and the door. His low growl filled the small space, a primal sound of warning that raised the hairs on my arms. The door began to swing open, revealing a sliver of moonlit night. Silhouetted in the opening were 2 large, hulking shapes, not Stephen or Elizabeth, enforcers. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness, fixed not on Sebastian, but on me over his shoulder. "Alpha," one of them rumbled, his voice devoid of respect. "The betas request the human's presence for her safety assessment." Lies, the air reeked of aggression. Sebastian's growl deepened, vibrating through the stone floor. "You take orders from your alpha. Stand down." "The betas speak for the concerned elders and warriors," the second enforcer said, taking a step inside. "The human is a point of contention. Removing her temporarily will calm the pack." It was a coup in microcosm. They weren't here to challenge him outright, not yet. They were here to strip his authority, to take what was his by contract. To take me. Sebastian's posture changed. The coiled tension snapped. The political alpha was gone, replaced by something raw and ancient. The energy in the room spiked, a static crackle that made my teeth ache. "You will not touch her," Sebastian said, and his voice was different. It was layered, a chorus of a man and a beast, a sound of absolute, unchallengeable authority. The alpha voice. The enforcers flinched, but they held their ground, their own low growls answering. "Do not force a fight, Sebastian. The pack is divided. You cannot win this." What happened next changed everything. The larger enforcer lunged, not at Sebastian, but around him, his clawed hand reaching for me. Instinctively, I stumbled back. Sebastian moved. It was too fast to see, a blur of motion, a snarl that was pure fury and a sickening crunch of impact. The enforcer was thrown against the stone wall with a bone-jarring thud and slid down, unconscious. The second enforcer roared in anger and shifted. Clothes tore, bones cracked and reknitted in the horrifying, rapid symphony of transformation. In seconds, a massive, silver-furred wolf with furious amber eyes filled the doorway, saliva dripping from its fangs. Terror, pure and paralyzing, shot through me. This was the monster from the stories. This was death. Sebastian didn't shift. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the wolf and me. His human form seemed to swell with power, the air around him distorting. The mysterious connection between us suddenly flared to life, not as a shock, but as a torrent. I felt a dizzying rush of his fury, his protective rage, his absolute determination. And I felt something else, a pull, a channel. The wolf launched itself. Sebastian raised a hand. Enough. The command was a thunderclap of will, but it wasn't just his. In that fractured second, as the beast flew toward us, my own fear and desperate need to not be taken screamed through me. It didn't feel like a thought. It was a reflex, a silent, white-hot no that shot from the core of my being down that impossible link between us. And the world bent. A visible wave of force, shimmering like heat haze, erupted from Sebastian. It struck the leaping wolf midair and hurled it backward through the open door as if it weighed nothing. The wolf yelped, a sound of shock and pain, and tumbled into the night, scrambling away with a whimper. Silence, deafening and profound, rushed in. Sebastian stood perfectly still, his arms still outstretched. He slowly looked down at his hand, then turned his head, his glowing eyes wide with utter, world-shattering shock, and looked at me. The power hadn't come from him alone. I felt it. He felt it. Ariana Vales, a human with no strength, no speed, no claws, had somehow, through the bond he called a curse, amplified his alpha command. His whisper was a broken thing in the dark, filled with terror and a dreadful, dawning awe. "What have you done?" The silence in the stone sanctuary was absolute, broken only by our ragged breathing and the distant, fading snarls of the retreating enforcers. The air still crackled with the echo of that impossible power. My hands trembled. I had done that. Me, a human. I had reached inside a werewolf alpha and twisted his command into a weapon. Sebastian stared at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. The cold, controlled mask was utterly shattered, replaced by a raw, vulnerable shock that was far more frightening. "You!" he breathed, the words scraping from his throat. "You channeled it. You pulled it from me." "I didn't mean to." The protest was instinctive, childish. I hugged myself, the chill of the stone seeping through my clothes. I just didn't want him to touch me. I wanted him gone. And so he was. Sebastian finally looked at me, his silver eyes blazing with a terrifying mix of awe and dread. "Do you understand what this means, Ariana? The bond isn't just a feeling. It's a conduit. My strength, my authority. It answers to your will in a moment of crisis. You are a vulnerability I cannot afford, and a weapon I cannot control." The truth of it landed like a physical blow. I wasn't just a political liability. I was a live wire spliced into his very soul. A weakness his enemies could exploit if they ever realized, and a danger to him if I ever lost control. The contract was a joke. This bond was a life sentence. Crunch. The sound of a deliberate footstep on gravel outside the door froze us both. Sebastian moved instantly, a blur of lethal grace, placing his body between me and the entrance. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated in my own ribs. But the door didn't burst open. Instead, a familiar, anxious voice filtered through the thick wood. "Alpha, Miss Ariana, it's Micah. Please, I'm alone." Sebastian's posture didn't relax, but he gave a sharp nod. I called out, my voice shaky. "You can come in, Micah." The door opened slowly. The Omega slipped inside, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. The shattered remnants of the wooden chair, the scorch mark-like disturbance on the stone floor where the enforcer had been thrown, Sebastian's torn shirt, my pale face. He carried a large satchel that smelled of herbs and fresh linen. "I heard the commotion from the tree line," Micah whispered, setting the bag down. "The betas, they're mustering support in the Great Hall. They're saying you attacked your own enforcers without cause, Alpha. That you're unstable. That the human is witchcraft." He flinched, unable to meet my eyes. Sebastian's laugh was a hollow, bitter thing. "Of course they are, turning my defense of the contracted Luna into a sign of madness. Clever." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "What did you bring, Micah?" "Supplies, food, water, a medical kit, blankets." He gestured to the bag. "And a message from no one, it just came to me." He swallowed hard, his submissive posture deepening. "The Ridgecrest scouts have been spotted closer than ever before. At the northern ridge. They're testing the borders, now of all times. The air left my lungs. An external threat, on the eve of an internal coup. Stephen and Elizabeth's timing wasn't just ambitious, it was catastrophic. Sebastian's face went dangerously still. "They smell the blood in the water," he said, his voice deathly quiet. He turned to me, his decision etched in the hard lines of his face. "We can't stay here. This sanctuary is compromised. They'll come back in greater numbers." "Where then?" I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. "There's nowhere in this pack that's safe for me." "Not in the pack," he said, his gaze turning inward, calculating. "We go to the border, to the northern ridge." Micah gasped. "Alpha, no. That's where the Ridgecrest wolves are. It's a war zone." "Exactly," Sebastian said, a ruthless light returning to his eyes. "It's the last place Stephen and Elizabeth will expect me to take her. Their rebellion is a domestic play. They won't risk exposing themselves to a rival pack so openly. And it forces the issue. If Ridgecrest is making a move, I need to see it for myself." He looked at me, and for the first time it felt like a real decision was being made with me in the room, not for me. "Can you run?" The question was absurd. "I'm human, Sebastian, not a wolf. You'll have to be more than human tonight." He began rifling through the satchel Micah brought, pulling out a dark, hooded cloak. "Put this on. It will mask your scent somewhat. Micah, you will return to the compound. Say nothing. If questioned, you came to check on the Alpha's orders and found this place empty. You know nothing." Micah nodded, trembling but resolute. "Be safe, Alpha, Miss Ariana." The Omega slipped out as silently as he came. The weight of the cloak in my hands felt like a shroud. Sebastian moved to the far wall of the sanctuary, where the natural granite met the stone masonry. He pressed against a seemingly seamless section, and with a grating sound, a narrow, dark passageway was revealed, exhaling a breath of damp, cold air. "An old escape route," he explained shortly. "It leads into the deep forest away from the compound. We'll circle around to the north." "Sebastian," I said, my voice small in the vast, cold room. "What happens when we get there? What's the plan?" He paused at the mouth of the tunnel, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkness. "The plan," he said, his voice low and strained, "is to survive the night, and to see what this bond of ours truly is. Now stay close. And whatever you do not let go of my hand." He reached back. I stared at his extended hand, remembering the electric cataclysm of our last touch. This was different. Not a grab, but an offer, a necessity. I placed my hand in his. The connection flared instantly. A warm, vibrant current that shot up my arm and settled in my chest like a second heartbeat. It wasn't the violent surge from before. It was a steady, thrumming link. He felt it too. I saw the shudder pass through him. But he didn't let go. His fingers closed around mine, firm and unyielding. "The bond is calm when we choose it," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "It's the fear that makes it wild. Control your fear, Ariana. Your fear is now our greatest enemy." He pulled me into the darkness. The tunnel was a nightmare of close, dripping walls and uneven footing. Sebastian moved with preternatural certainty, but I stumbled, my human senses useless. The only anchor was his hand, the only light the faint, silver gleam of his eyes when he glanced back. The sounds of the forest grew closer, the sigh of wind, the distant call of an owl. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel sloped upward and ended in a curtain of thick roots and ferns. Sebastian pushed through, pulling me out into the freezing, open air of the deep woods. The moon was higher now, bathing the world in an eerie monochrome. He didn't stop, setting a brutal pace through the undergrowth. I ran, my lungs burning, the cloak snagging on branches. He was my only tether, pulling me along the invisible thread of our connection. I focused on the feel of his hand, the rhythm of his breathing I could somehow sense through the bond, and not on the paralyzing terror. We ran for miles. The landscape changed, the gentle slopes giving way to sharper, rockier terrain. The air grew thinner, colder. Finally, Sebastian slowed, pulling me behind the massive, gnarled trunk of a fallen ancient oak. Ahead, through a break in the trees, I could see a stark, rocky ridge silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The northern border. He released my hand, and the immediate intensity of the bond receded to a background hum. Peering over the log, he went perfectly still, every line of his body taut with focus. "There," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. I followed his gaze. At first I saw nothing but shadows and rock, then movement. A large, gray wolf emerged from behind a boulder, its coat silvered by the moon. It lifted its nose, testing the wind. Then another appeared, and another. 4 Ridgecrest wolves, moving with a deliberate, patrol-like precision along the spine of the ridge that marked the boundary of Nightfall land. "They're not just sniffing," Sebastian said, his jaw clenched. "They're positioning." A 5th figure emerged, not in wolf form but walking on 2 legs. A man, tall and broad, with an air of authority that even I could sense from this distance. He stood at the highest point, looking directly into Nightfall territory, as if waiting. "They're Alpha," Sebastian breathed. "Luca's Ridgecrest. He wouldn't be here for a routine patrol." My blood ran cold. This was an invasion waiting for a signal. Crack. The sound of a twig snapping behind us was deafening. Sebastian whirled, shoving me down behind the log. But it was too late. Well, well, the Alpha and his pet, playing in the woods. Stephen stepped into the small clearing, flanked by 6 enforcers in human form, all armed with vicious-looking, silver-knuckled gloves. Elizabeth was at his shoulder, her beautiful face a mask of cold triumph. They had found us. "You led us on quite a chase, brother," Stephen said, his smile all teeth. "But you always were sentimental about this ridge. Father brought us here to teach us about borders, remember? You took his lessons too much to heart." Sebastian rose slowly, placing himself squarely in front of me. The air thickened with the promise of violence. "You brought Silver onto Pack territory, Stephen. You consort with rebels under the eyes of a rival Alpha." He gestured toward the ridge. "Look, open your eyes and see what your treachery invites." Stephen didn't even glance that way. "Distractions, your last desperate play. The Pack sees your weakness. They feel your instability. Hand the human over to us for judgment, renounce this farce of a contract, and your challenge may yet be merciful." Elizabeth's eyes glittered. "The full moon run begins soon, Ariana. The woods can be so dangerous for a fragile thing like you." The enforcers fanned out, surrounding our position. The hum of the bond in my chest spiked into a sharp, painful buzz. Sebastian's fear, cold and metallic, bled into me alongside my own. He was powerful, but he was 1 against 7, and he was tethered to me, a liability. "You think this is about the Pack?" Sebastian's voice dropped, low and lethal. "This is about our father's will, about your jealousy. You would burn this Pack to the ground to sit in a chair that will never be yours." Stephen's face darkened. "Take her," he snarled. The enforcers lunged. What happened next changed everything. Sebastian moved like a storm, a blur of motion and snapping jaws as he partially shifted, his hands becoming claws. He threw the first enforcer into a tree. The second came at me. I screamed, scrambling back. The bond erupted. It wasn't a gentle pull this time. It was a yank, a tidal force. Sebastian's power didn't just flow through me, it detonated from him. A visible wave of force, like heated air rising from asphalt, blasted outwards from his body. The enforcers were thrown back as if by a concussion grenade, crashing into trees and the forest floor. Stephen and Elizabeth staggered, shielding their faces. But the wave didn't stop at them. It rippled out across the clearing, over the fallen oak, and up the slope of the northern ridge. The Ridgecrest wolves, caught completely off guard, were knocked from their feet. The standing Alpha, Lucas, stumbled, his head snapping toward the source of the power toward us. A silence, profound and terrible, fell over both sides of the border. Every eye, Nightfall rebel and Ridgecrest invader alike, was now fixed on our position. The secret was out. The power had been felt by all. Sebastian stood panting, his claws retracting, staring at his hands in horror once more. He looked at me, and I saw the full, devastating realization in his eyes. I hadn't just channeled his power this time. I had amplified it. I had broadcast it to the entire forest. From the ridge, Alpha Lucas Ridgecrest straightened. He took a deep, deliberate breath, scenting the air. A slow, intrigued smile spread across his face. He took one step, then another, crossing over the rocky boundary and into Nightfall territory. His voice, carried by some trick of wind or power, reached us clear as a bell across the distance. "Sebastian Blackwood," he called, his tone one of dawning, hungry understanding. "What is that fascinating creature you're hiding?" The cliffhanger was no longer just about a coup. It was about possession. Sebastian's enemies within the pack now knew the bond was real and powerful. And his rival from outside the pack now knew I existed, and that I was something extraordinary. The walls were not just closing in. They had collapsed entirely. Sebastian's hand found mine in the crushing silence. His grip was iron, his voice a shattered whisper meant only for me, filled with a fateful, chilling certainty. Run. The shockwave of raw power had barely faded, leaving the scent of ozone and pine in the cold mountain air. Ariana's ears rang. Before her, the rebel enforcers were scattered like fallen leaves, groaning in the dirt. Stephen was on one knee, a snarl frozen on his face. Elizabeth stared, her mask of pleasantry shattered into pure, unvarnished hatred. And beyond them, stepping gracefully over the scent-marked border stones as if they were mere pebbles, was the stranger, Lucas Ridgecrest. His amber eyes glinted with predatory interest, fixed not on Sebastian, but on her. He felt it, Ariana thought, her blood turning to ice. They all felt it. "Well," Lucas drawled, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone that carried easily across the clearing. "This is a fascinating development. A human causing such a disturbance in the force, Sebastian. You've been holding out on the neighboring packs." Sebastian shifted, a low, continuous growl rumbling from his chest. He positioned his body squarely between Ariana and the new threat, but the tension in his shoulders spoke of a war on two fronts. The rebels at his back, the rival in his face. "This is Nightfall territory, Lucas. You're trespassing." "Am I?" Lucas took another deliberate step forward, his own warriors, lean, sharp-featured men and women, fanning out silently behind him. "Seems to me your territory is having a bit of a civil war. And that little display," he nodded toward Ariana, a slow, intrigued smile spreading. "That didn't feel like a simple Alpha's command. That felt like something shared, ancient. Care to explain?" Stephen found his feet, wiping blood from his lip. He looked from Sebastian to Lucas, a calculating gleam replacing his rage. "The Alpha has lost his mind, Ridgecrest. He's bound himself to a human through some unstable magic. She's a liability. A crack in our defenses you've clearly already sensed." "I am right here," Ariana whispered, but the words were swallowed by the wind. She was an object in their debate, a prize, a weapon. The aftermath of the bond's eruption left her hollowed out and trembling, a live wire sparking with Sebastian's residual energy. She could still feel the echo of his wolf, a second heartbeat inside her ribcage. "My pack's affairs are not your concern," Sebastian stated, his voice ironclad, but Ariana, so close to him, heard the strain beneath. The bond thrummed with his exhaustion, his strategic calculations spinning at a frantic pace. "They become my concern when your instability spills over my border," Lucas countered, his smile fading. "A power surge like that? It's a beacon. Every pack for 50 miles will be curious. The Ridgecrest pack prefers its neighbors stable. Or absent." His eyes flicked to Elizabeth. "Your betas seem to share my assessment of the stability issue." Elizabeth seized the opening. "Alpha Ridgecrest, if you could contain this situation, the Nightfall Pack would be grateful. Our true leadership wishes only to restore strength and tradition." The betrayal was so bald, so formal, it stole Ariana's breath. Sebastian's growl deepened. "You invite a rival Alpha onto our land to depose me. You are traitors, stripped of your ranks." "Rank is earned," Stephen spat, "and you've forfeited yours by clinging to your human." What happened next changed everything. Lucas's gaze, sharp and assessing, swept over the standoff. He saw Sebastian, isolated and wounded, guarding his fragile, powerful secret. He saw the armed rebels, eager for regime change. A predator's opportunity. "I'll make you a trade, Blackwood," Lucas said, his tone shifting to one of cold business. "A clean solution. You cede the northern quarter of your territory, the mineral ridges, to Ridgecrest. In return, I will take the human off your hands. Permanently. It removes your complication, gives your betas what they want, and prevents a war between our packs today. A diplomatic solution. The world narrowed to a tunnel. Take the human off your hands. Permanently." Ariana's heart hammered against her throat. She looked at Sebastian's profile, searching for any sign, any hint. Sebastian didn't even blink. "No." "Sebastian," Stephen barked. "Be rational, it's one human for the integrity of the pack." "She is mine." The words weren't a shout. They were a vow, layered with a possessiveness that went far beyond the contract. It echoed in the clearing, silencing the wind for a moment. Lucas's eyebrows rose. Stephen looked triumphant, as if this was the final proof of his madness. Ariana's mind reeled. Mine. The word should have felt like a cage. Instead, in the face of being traded like a parcel of land, it felt like a shield. "Then you leave me no choice," Lucas sighed, a false regret in his voice. "If the Nightfall Pack cannot control its alpha or its assets, Ridgecrest will secure the border ourselves. By force." He gave a slight nod. His warriors shifted, a synchronized step forward. The rebel enforcers, seeing a common enemy in Sebastian, tightened their grips on their weapons, aligning themselves not with Lucas, but against their alpha. The two groups didn't merge, but they formed a pincer, closing the circle around Sebastian and Ariana. The forest sounds died, the birds, the rustling creatures. All that remained was the sound of breathing, the creak of leather, and the soft crunch of boots on frost. If only I had known, Ariana thought wildly, that my father's debt would buy a war. "Micah," Sebastian said, his voice suddenly eerily calm. "The contingency." From the shadow of a massive spruce tree at the edge of the clearing, where he had been silently observing, the Omega flinched. All eyes turned to him. He looked petrified, a mouse surrounded by wolves and lions. Alpha. Now, Micah," Stephen laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You pin your hopes on the Omega. This is your grand strategy. But Micah, under the weight of Sebastian's command and a desperate loyalty Ariana had only glimpsed, fumbled inside his worn jacket. He pulled out not a weapon, but a small, old-fashioned brass horn. He put it to his lips, his cheeks puffing out. The sound that erupted was not loud, but it was strange, a low, mournful, resonant note that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It didn't belong in the modern forest. It was a sound from another time. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Lucas looked amused. Stephen scoffed. Then, from the deep woods behind Sebastian, from the direction of the main compound, came an answering sound. Not a horn, but the sound of movement. Many, many movements. The rustle of undergrowth, the snap of branches, the soft thud of paws and feet hitting the earth in unison. Through the trees they emerged, not the young enforcers in tactical gear. These were older, grizzled. Some bore scars that spoke of old wars. They wore simpler clothes, but their eyes were sharp, their postures straight. Among them were elders, their faces lined with wisdom and severity. They moved with a quiet, disciplined purpose, fanning out to form a line behind Sebastian and Ariana. There were perhaps 20 of them. Not a large force, but their presence carried a weight of history, of authority. An elderly woman with silver hair braided down her back stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over Stephen and Elizabeth with profound disappointment. "You would sell our land and invite a Ridgecrest wolf to dictate our pack's fate." Her voice was like grinding stones. "Your father's will, Stephen, named Sebastian Alpha, not you, and it charged us with upholding that will when the Alpha's judgment is in question." She turned her stern eyes to Sebastian. "We have questioned it, Alpha, deeply. But this," she gestured to Lucas, to the rebels, "this is not the way." The senior warriors and elders. The faction Stephen had claimed was on his side. They hadn't been. They had been waiting, watching. Sebastian's contingency. The balance of power in the clearing shifted again, crackling with new tension. It was no longer a pincer. It was a 3-way standoff. Sebastian with the elders, Stephen and Elizabeth with the rebels, and Lucas Ridgecrest with his warriors in the middle. His opportunistic play suddenly complicated. Lucas's amused expression finally vanished. "A divided house is still a weak house," he stated coldly. "It changes nothing." "It changes everything," the elder woman, named Alara, replied. "The Nightfall Pack is not yours for the taking, Ridgecrest. Leave." A low growl started among the Ridgecrest warriors. Lucas held up a hand, silencing them. His eyes were locked on Sebastian. "This isn't over. That power, it's a threat. My pack will not ignore it. You've shown your fangs, Blackwood. And your weakness." His gaze sliced to Ariana one last time, a promise of future interest. Then, with a jerk of his head, he turned. His warriors melted back into the trees on the Ridgecrest side of the border, disappearing as silently as they had come. But the danger was far from over. With the external threat receding, the internal one snapped back into focus, sharper and more immediate. Stephen stared at the line of elders, betrayal and fury warring on his face. "You side with this, with his human pet. We side with the legitimate Alpha and the preservation of the pack," Alara said, unmoved. "Lay down your arms, Stephen. Elizabeth, this ends here." Elizabeth's laugh was a shrill, ugly thing. "It ends when she is ended." She pointed a trembling finger at Ariana. "Can't you feel it? She's a sickness. That power isn't natural. He's tied our pack's fate to a time bomb." Sebastian finally moved. He took a step forward away from Ariana toward his betas. The space he left felt like a chasm. "The only sickness here is your ambition," he said, his voice deathly quiet. "You have one final chance. Stand down. Accept confinement. Your lives will be spared." The offer hung in the air. For a heartbeat, Ariana thought she saw doubt in Stephen's eyes. Then it was gone, buried under layers of resentment and greed. "I'd rather die than live in a pack you lead," Stephen snarled. He threw back his head and let out a roar, not of human frustration, but a guttural, transforming challenge. The sound triggered chaos. Rebel enforcers shifted. Clothes ripped, bones cracked, and where men had stood, now massive wolves with russet and gray fur erupted, fangs bared. The elders and senior warriors reacted instantly, not shifting, but moving with preternatural speed, engaging the wolves with silver-tipped weapons and their own formidable strength. The clear Ariana screamed, stumbling back as a wolf. One of the rebels lunged past Sebastian, its yellow eyes fixed on her. Sebastian intercepted it midair, his own shift happening in a blur of black fur and explosive motion. He wasn't the largest wolf, but he was a tempest of controlled fury, a dark shadow moving with lethal precision. Ariana, to me, it was Micah, his voice shrill with panic. He was beckoning from the relative safety of the large spruce. She ran, her legs clumsy with fear, ducking as snarls and the clash of bodies filled the air. The sounds were horrific. The wet tear of flesh, pained yelps, the guttural snaps of jaws. She crashed into the tree beside Micah, who was shaking violently. "They'll kill her," he was muttering. "Elizabeth, she'll find a way, she'll—" A russet wolf, smaller and faster than the others, broke from the melee. Elizabeth. Her wolf form was sleek, her eyes burning with intelligent malice. She dodged an elder's spear and bolted straight for their tree. Sebastian, locked in combat with Stephen's massive tawny wolf, saw it. He disengaged with a brutal swipe that opened Stephen's shoulder and launched himself toward them. But he was too far. Elizabeth's wolf leaped. Ariana did the only thing she could. She didn't try to run. She raised her hands, not in surrender, but in a futile, instinctive gesture of defense. She focused not on the snapping jaws, but on the bond, that terrifying, living cord that tied her soul to Sebastian's. She didn't pull. She pushed. She pushed every ounce of her fear, her rage at being hunted, her sheer will to survive down the connection. The effect was not an explosion. It was a wave. A visible pulse of silvery energy, shot through with Sebastian's dark power, erupted from her in a dome. It passed through Micah harmlessly. It hit Elizabeth's wolf in midair. The she-wolf didn't fly back. She seized, every muscle locked. She crashed to the ground not with a snarl, but with a choked whimper, twitching, paralyzed. The wave expanded outward, touching every combatant in the clearing. For 5 full seconds, the battle froze. Every wolf, every warrior, stumbled as if struck by a sudden, overwhelming vertigo. Their connections to each other, their pack bonds, flickered and screamed with static. The only bond that burned bright and clear was the one between the black wolf and the human woman by the tree. Sebastian, now at her side in human form again, naked and heaving, stared at her with something beyond shock. It was awe and terror. You can control it," he breathed. Ariana lowered her hands, her whole body trembling with the effort. I don't know. I just didn't want to die." The frozen moment shattered. The rebels, disoriented and terrified by the new, controlled display of her power, began to falter. The elders pressed their advantage. Stephen, bleeding heavily, saw the tide turn. With a furious, defeated howl, he broke away, his wolf fleeing into the forest. Several rebels followed him. Elizabeth, still struggling to move her limbs, was swiftly pinned by 2 senior warriors. The fight was over. Silence descended, broken only by the moans of the wounded. The cost was clear. Bodies, both wolf and human, lay in the dirt. The air reeked of blood, iron, and spent magic. Sebastian turned to Alara. "Secure the prisoners. Tend the wounded. The compound is yours. I must get her to safety." Alara nodded, her eyes grave as they rested on Ariana. "The bond is real, and it is formidable. The pack will have questions, Alpha." "They will have answers," Sebastian said, his voice thick with exhaustion. "When the pack is whole again." He took Ariana's arm, his touch sending the now familiar current through her, but it was weary, depleted. "We need to move. Stephen is still out there, and Lucas will be back." He led her not back toward the compound, but deeper into the mountains, along a treacherous, hidden game trail. Micah trailed behind, a silent, shocked shadow. They walked for what felt like hours, until the sounds of the clearing were far behind and the air grew thin and cold. They came to a cave, hidden by a waterfall that was mostly frozen into jagged, silent curtains of ice. Inside, it was dry and surprisingly deep. Sebastian lit a small, pre-stashed lantern. The light flickered over his grim, blood-streaked face. "This is the only safe place left," he said, his voice hollow. "For now." Ariana sank onto a flat rock, her energy utterly spent. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a crushing fatigue. What did I do back there?" To Elizabeth. Sebastian paced, a restless predator in a cage. "You didn't just channel power, you weaponized the bond itself. You sent a pulse through the Pack's network. You short-circuited their wolves." He stopped and looked at her, the awe still there. "It's a fated mate's ultimate defense. To protect the bond, it can temporarily sever others. It's legend. I've never seen it." "A defense," Ariana whispered. It felt like an attack. "It's both." He ran a hand through his hair. "Ariana, the full moon is tomorrow night." The words landed like a physical blow. The run. The accident Stephen and Elizabeth had planned. The entire pack, running together, their bonds at their strongest. "I can't," she said, panic rising anew. "Sebastian, after today, they'll tear me apart the second I step into that run." "You have to," he said, and for the first time, his voice held not a command, but a plea. "The run, under the full moon, is when the pack bond is renewed and affirmed. If you are not there as my contracted Luna, it will be seen as the ultimate rejection. The pack will be irrevocably fractured. The elders supported me today, but their loyalty is to a strong, united Nightfall. If we hide, we lose everything. What if I do that pulse thing again, to everyone?" He knelt before her, his eyes intense. "If you pulse the entire pack bond during the sacred run, you could shatter it permanently. You could leave every wolf in Nightfall disconnected, feral. It would destroy the pack from the inside out." The impossible choice hung between them. Face the hostile pack and risk being killed. Or stay hidden and guarantee the pack's destruction, making her the cause of its ruin. Micah, huddled by the cave entrance, spoke in a small, terrified voice. "Alpha, there's another problem." Sebastian turned. "What?" Micah's face was pale in the lantern light. "When the horn sounded, when the elders came, I saw something in the trees, on our side of the border, before Ridgecrest left." He swallowed hard. It was a human with a camera. A very, very long lens. The air left the cave. A human, a camera. "A reporter," Ariana breathed, disbelief layering over her terror. "Out here." "Not a reporter," Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. The color drained from his face. "A hunter, a supernatural tracker. They sell their findings to the highest bidder. Governments, private collectors, other packs." He looked at Ariana, and in his eyes, she saw a new, more profound dread than any he'd shown before. "If they got footage of the fight, of your power, of the bond manifesting." He stood, the full weight of the catastrophe crashing down. "Then the secret isn't just out with the packs. The human world knows, and they will come for you." The words hung in the frozen air of the cave, colder than the ice veiling the walls. The full moon run. The very event Stephen and Elizabeth had planned to use to kill me. Sebastian's face was etched with a grim finality that brooked no argument. If only I had known, then, what that run would truly demand. Not just of my body, but of my soul. Micah, huddled by the small fire he'd managed to coax to life, flinched. Alpha, you can't be serious. The pack is in tatters. The rebels are scattered, but their anger isn't gone. To put her in the center of the run is the only thing that might keep the pack from tearing itself apart completely, Sebastian finished, his voice a low growl. The sound echoed off the stone, a primal vibration I felt in my teeth. Alara and the elders upheld my authority, but their support is conditional. They saw what she did. They felt it. To them, she is either a weapon of the Alpha, legitimizing my rule, or an abomination that proves my weakness. There is no middle ground. The run will decide. Decide what? I asked, my own voice small. Whether I live or die. Sebastian's gaze locked onto mine. The bond between us, that terrifying conduit, was quiet but present, a live wire buried in snow. Whether you belong. The full moon run is the pack's most sacred ritual. It is when we embrace our wildest selves, when the bonds of hierarchy are tested and reaffirmed through the chase, through the hunt. If you run with me, as my Luna, and the pack accepts it, the fracture begins to heal. And if they don't, the question was a whisper. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The memory of Elizabeth's snarling jaw, of Stephen's contempt, of the dozens of hostile eyes in the courtyard was answer enough. We have until moonrise, Sebastian said, turning to look at the cave entrance, where the late afternoon light was beginning to tinge with gold. Luca's Ridgecrest has withdrawn, but he's watching. The human with the camera is out there, too. This run isn't just for the pack. It's a statement. To our rivals, to anyone watching, Nightfall is not weak. What happened next changed everything. Not the run itself, but the preparation for it. Sebastian moved closer to me, the heat of his body cutting through the cave's chill. The bond, he said, his voice dropping so only I could hear. What you did on the border, you pushed power through it. You used it as a shield, a weapon. I didn't mean to, it just happened. I know, but tonight it cannot just happen. You must control it, or it will control you. The raw power of a fated mate bond in the throes of a full moon, he trailed off, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. It could shatter minds. It could call every supernatural creature within 100 miles. It could broadcast our location to that hunter like a beacon. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold raced down my spine. How do I control something I don't understand? You let me in, he said, and it wasn't a command. It was a request, layered with a vulnerability I'd never heard from him before. Not just a trickle, all the way, and I will show you how to build a wall. The process was agony. It was intimacy of the most violent kind. He took my hands. The moment our skin touched, the conduit blazed to life, a torrent of raw sensation. His power, vast and dark and stormy, my own strange amplifying energy, bright and chaotic. I gasped, trying to pull back, but he held firm. Don't fight it, he gritted out, his knuckles white. Feel it, follow it to me. I closed my eyes, drowning in the flood. I felt his relentless will, the weight of his authority, the sharp, bitter tang of his fear. Fear for his pack, fear of this bond, fear for me. And beneath it all, something else, something warm and solid and terrifyingly possessive. Mine. The thought wasn't my own. It was his, carried on the current. Yours, something in me echoed back before I could stop it. He flinched as if struck. The torrent stuttered. In that moment of shared shock, I saw it, a pattern in the chaos. The flow of power wasn't random. It moved along the lines of our connection, like blood through veins. His power came to me. Mine returned to him, amplified. Now, he breathed, his voice strained. Build the wall, not to block, to channel. Picture a dam with a single gate. The gate is your will. I focused, pouring every ounce of my concentration into that mental image. Stone rising, cold and heavy, against the psychic flood. The power roared against it, seeking escape. I felt Sebastian's consciousness beside mine, bolstering the structure, guiding the flow. He showed me the gate, a narrow, focused point. With a mental scream of effort, I slammed it shut. Silence. The torrent reduced to a manageable stream, flowing neatly through the designated channel. The overwhelming sensory overload faded to a background hum. I opened my eyes, panting as if I'd run a mile. Sebastian was watching me, sweat beading on his temple, an expression of awe and dread on his face. "You did it," he murmured. "You showed me how," I replied, my voice shaky. The world outside the cave was sinking into twilight. The first stars pricked the deep violet sky. And then, a sliver of luminous silver breached the horizon. The moon was rising. A long, mournful howl tore through the mountain silence, answered instantly by another and another. Not from outside, from within Sebastian. His body trembled, his eyes flashing molten gold. The sound was a call, a command, and a surrender all at once. "It's time," he said, his voice thick with the wolf. He began to remove his tattered shirt. "Stay close to me. No matter what you see, no matter what you feel. The run is chaos, but I am the eye of the storm. You must be in the eye with me." Micah shifted nervously by the entrance. "The elders are here, Alpha, at the tree line. Alara leads them." Sebastian gave a sharp nod. "And the others?" "Gathering. The loyalists are forming up. The rebels, they're there too, watching, waiting." The transformation was not the grotesque, bone-breaking horror of movies. It was a swift, terrifying blur of shadow and light. Sebastian's form seemed to dissolve and reconfigure in the space of a heartbeat. Where the man had stood was now a massive wolf, his fur the color of a midnight forest, his eyes the same piercing, intelligent gold. He was enormous, power radiating from him in waves that made the air vibrate. He nudged my hand with his broad head, a gesture that was both wolfish and deeply Sebastian. Together, we stepped out of the cave. The scene below took my breath away. In the clearing, bathed in the stark light of the rising full moon, were hundreds of wolves. Silvers, grays, browns, blacks. They moved like liquid shadows, a sea of restless energy. At the forefront stood a majestic silver wolf with wise, ancient eyes, Alara. She dipped her head slightly to Sebastian, but my gaze was drawn to the edges. There, in smaller, snarling clusters, were the rebels. No Stephen, but Elizabeth was there, held between two large, stern-looking wolves, her form sleek and furious. Her eyes, burning with hatred, found me instantly. Sebastian lifted his head and unleashed a howl that shook the very mountains. It was a sound of absolute authority, of challenge, of invitation. The run began. It was not a run. It was a tempest. Sebastian lunged forward, and I ran beside him, my human legs impossibly keeping pace, fueled by the stream of power flowing through our bond. The pack surged around us, a thunderous river of muscle and fur. The world became a blur of moon-dappled trees, the thunder of paws, the panting breaths, the wild, pungent smell of the forest and wolf. We were the spearhead, and the challenge came instantly. A large, brindled wolf, one of the rebels, broke from the flank and charged, not at Sebastian, but directly at me. Jaws snapped a hair's breadth from my arm. Sebastian didn't break stride. He simply swerved, a mountain of black fury, and slammed into the attacker, sending him tumbling end over end with a single, powerful blow. The message was clear: touch her, and you touch me. But the attacks kept coming. A nip at my heels, a body check from the side. Each time, Sebastian or a loyalist wolf intercepted. The run was a violent, chaotic ballet of allegiance and rebellion. And through it all, the moon poured its energy into the world. I felt it seeping into my skin, buzzing in my blood. The bond began to thrum, the stream swelling. The careful dam I'd built started to strain. Focus, Sebastian's voice echoed in my mind, a clear note in the psychic roar. The gate. Control it. We burst into a wide, high meadow, the moon overhead a blinding silver coin. Here, the pack began to circle, running faster and faster, a living, breathing vortex. Sebastian led me to the very center. This was the climax, the affirmation. The circling wolves began to howl, a symphony of wild music that vibrated in my chest. The power was cresting. The dam was cracking. Then I saw him. At the tree line, separate from the swirling pack, stood a wolf I knew was Stephen. He was larger than I remembered, his coat a patchy, angry red-brown. And he wasn't alone. 3 other large wolves flanked him. They weren't circling. They were stalking, moving against the current straight for the center. For me, Alara and the elders moved to intercept, but a knot of rebel wolves surged, blocking them. A deliberate, planned diversion. Stephen's eyes glowed with vicious intent. This was his final play. A public challenge in the heart of the run. He would kill the human Luna and break the Alpha in front of the entire pack. Panic, pure and icy, shot through me. The dam shattered. The bond exploded wide open. Power, raw and unfiltered, not just from Sebastian, but from the moon, from the very pack bonds around us, flooded into me. I screamed, but no sound came out. Light, a blinding silver gold, erupted from my skin. I couldn't control it. I could only direct it. I looked at Stephen, at his advancing threat, and I pushed. The wave of energy left me not as a paralyzing pulse, but as a focused lance of pure, commanding will. It wasn't just Sebastian's alpha power amplified. It was something else, something that spoke to the very core of Wolf. It hit Stephen. He didn't stumble or fall paralyzed. He stopped, his legs locked, his head lowered, not in attack, but in profound, involuntary submission. A whimper escaped his jaws. The wolves with him crumpled to their bellies, ears flat. The effect rippled outwards. The circling pack slowed, then halted. Every wolf in the meadow, loyalist and rebel alike, turned their heads toward the center. Toward me. The howling ceased. The only sound was the wind and the ragged sound of my breathing. In the profound silence, I did the only thing I could think to do. I reached down and placed a trembling hand on Sebastian's head, where he stood steadfast beside me. The moment my fingers touched his fur, the amplified power flowing through me found its true purpose. It didn't blast out, it wove. Tendrils of silver-gold light, visible in the moonlit air, streamed from me, not attacking but connecting. They touched Alara, Micah, in his small, sandy-colored wolf form, the loyalist warriors, and then, one by one, the rebel wolves, even Elizabeth. The light didn't force, it asked. It presented a pattern, Sebastian at the center, me beside him, and all of them connected, strong. I was not just wielding alpha power. I was weaving the pack bond itself. The sensation was overwhelming. Hundreds of minds, hearts, loyalties, and fears brushing against mine. But at the center of it all was Sebastian, a dark, steady star, his will supporting mine, his presence making the weaving possible. One by one, the wolves in the meadow bowed their heads. A deep, resonant chorus of submission howls rose, not in challenge but in acknowledgement. In acceptance. The run was over. The light faded from my skin, from the air. Exhaustion hit me like a physical blow, and my knees buckled. Sebastian shifted in a blur of motion, his human arms catching me before I hit the ground. He held me close, his heart hammering against my ear. Alara, now in human form draped in a simple robe, approached. Her aged face was unreadable as she looked from Sebastian to me, cradled in his arms. "The legends spoke of this," she said, her voice hushed. "The Luna who does not just share the bond but mends it, who weaves the pack back together. She looked at Sebastian. Your fathers will be damned, Alpha. This is the strength you brought us. She turned to the assembled, silent pack, both human and wolf forms now present. The run has spoken, the bond is affirmed, the Luna is accepted. A howl of agreement rose, unified this time. But Sebastian's eyes were on the distant tree line where Stephen had been. He was gone, vanished into the night. A problem for another day. He looked down at me, his gold-flecked eyes searching mine. The contract, the debt, the political maneuver, it all lay in ashes. What remained was the bond, terrifying and real, and the fragile, newfound loyalty of a broken pack. Ariana, he said, my name a rough caress on his lips. In that moment, I knew the contract was void. I was not his Luna under terms of a deal. I had become his Luna in truth, in power, and in a way neither of us could ever have foreseen. The debt was paid in a currency far more ancient than money. The future was a tangled path of threats. Luca's ridgecrest, the lurking human hunter, the scattered remnants of rebellion. But as the pack's howls faded into the quiet mountain night, and Sebastian held me under the watchful eye of the moon, I understood one thing with perfect clarity. Our story was no longer about a contract. It was just beginning.